Matter. Need to thank Pat Rose for being guinea pig number one
Guinea
on
pig.
Turf Tuesday, man. Appreciate you letting us dust off the equipment and bring it to Belle Meade.
You've got quite a lot of it, and this microphone is really heavy.
Yeah, it's a learning curve,
Yeah.
a definite learning curve. Well, I think to get started, I've known you a long, long time.
Yeah.
Many that may be joining us, we've got superintendents that listen to this, and so, most of those will probably know you, particularly our Tennessee contingent. But maybe those in other states that might not be familiar with who you are. We've got a lot of extension professionals across the state that listen into Turf Tuesdays. We've got some lawn care companies that listen into Turf Tuesdays. Maybe talk a little bit about your background in how you got to Belle Meade, because like it's always been fascinating to me. It's never linear, right?
Right.
Like, I look at myself, I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts. I went to Penn State. I went back to Massachusetts for graduate school. I went back to Penn State for graduate school again. And then I moved to Hawaii, had my first job at the University of Hawaii. And then I went from Hawaii to Tennessee, right? That is not a straight line in any
No.
capacity.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of what's your path been to get to where you are today?
Yeah. It's been a long road, that's for sure. I grew up in Chattanooga, so I was fortunate to get to work at the honors course as a high school student for David Stone. And then after that, I worked at Cherokee Country Club in Knoxville for another terrific superintendent who you know very well, Chris Sykes. And got great advice from both of those men and went to the University of Kentucky. When I was at the University of Kentucky, I
We'll
got
we'll we'll pardon that for this.
yeah yeah. So I got to do an internship at Oakmont in Pittsburgh, which was obviously a different growing environment, a championship golf course. Learned a lot there. Went to Florida after college and worked at a 54-hole resort,
Okay.
which was very different. Um, then I moved back to Pittsburgh, worked at Fox Chapel Golf Club. Then I became superintendent at Tellico Village. I was superintendent at Signal Mountain in Chattanooga, and then Kansas City Country Club, where I was at for about 5 years when I got the opportunity to come back to Belle Meade.
Yeah. So you're pretty familiar with moving.
I've moved a lot.
The
My wife is really good at figuring those things out.
logistics of what goes into what box and how
Yeah,
they get all
yeah.
organized.
Christy handles all of that.
Yeah,
She's gotten really good at it.
yeah, no, it's never fun, but very
Yeah,
important.
that's
I
right.
want to go back to your Oakmont experience for a little bit, just because it's such a marquee club, and we had Mike McCormick at TTA last year,
Yeah.
as you remember, and one of the things that I think might be, I don't know if this was true for you, but as a kid who grew up in Chattanooga and worked at Tennessee clubs, what was it like to go to, that's an environment where Poe is the enemy
Hmm.
to now Poe is your
Hmm.
friend,
Yeah.
right? Like, what was
Yeah.
that transition like?
Yeah. Well, I would say in those days it seemed like POA would die in the summer.
Right.
So maybe it wasn't quite as bad, but yeah, the things that they would do with growth regulators to control seed heads and try and sustain the plant through the year. The watering techniques were different. Traffic management was different. Mowing techniques were very different. So it was quite a learning experience. And then, after Oakmont, I went to Florida, which you're dealing with Bermuda and an overseeding process, and then right back into Pittsburgh, where you've got bent POA fairways,
Right.
cool season roughs, and um, so it's been a good experience for me dealing with different mowing types and mower setups and watering
Right.
programs, fertility programs. So it's been interesting.
I think the other thing that's really cool too, and like I've never had the ability to work at a club like that, but one of the things working with superintendents now in the role that I'm in is you kind of see these, I don't want to say cliques because that's a derogatory word, but like guys that came out of the same unit kind of
Hmm.
stick together. Like I know,
Hmm.
for example, you overlapped with Josh Pope when you were
Right.
there, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of
Yeah.
have that Oakmont tie, and you'll kind of have that forever, even though
Yeah.
you've gone different ways and different clubs throughout your career. And what was it like to kind of just build that network and retain it?
Yeah. John Zimmers is, I believe, an amazing person. He's been so good to me, and he's an amazing teacher. And he throws you into a group of guys, and as well as I do, when you're kind of in the heat of the battle, whether it's a ball team or a crew, and you're spending 12, 14 hours a day with some of these guys, you can really build
Yeah.
some lifelong friendships. And I still have a lot of those friendships from the places I've worked out of state. And you mentioned Josh Pope, very close friend of mine, and very excited for him and his new adventure too.
Yeah, yeah, no, he's it's been interesting. This is a moment in the business where it felt like maybe, I mean, for more than a decade, maybe a decade and a half, there was really no movement in
Hmm.
terms of like jobs
Yeah.
opening.
Yeah. And then
And
the
over,
floodgates.
over the past two
Yeah.
years, it feels like constant movement,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That like all the jobs opened at one time, and now it's like musical chairs kind of on
Right.
steroids.
Right. Part of that is some of the legends in the industry
Right.
retiring. Obviously, David Stone and here at Belle Meade,
Yeah.
Doug Ward was in this position for 39 years.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about Belle Meade. Like you want to get back to Tennessee, obviously. What about this club kind of really stuck
Hmm.
out to you and excited you as a place where with your diversified background, managing all those different grasses, this just felt like this was the fit.
Hmm. Yeah. So Belle Meade, is really the premier country club in the state of Tennessee. It's been around, since 1901. It's got a rich history in hosting the right championships, a rich history in amateur golf, and we've got some exciting things coming up. But just the day-to-day aspect of managing the golf course is really interesting to me. The membership plays really good golf. It's a big membership. They play a lot of rounds of golf and they play very well. So it provides some interest in how we set up the golf course each day and how we're mowing the place and just trying to present the right challenge. But at the same time, we have children and families that will come out and play. So it's important we strike a balance. But we've got +5 handicaps that'll be out there and amongst a family with
Right,
8-year-olds. So
right,
it's an interesting place.
right. So and talk a little bit for those who haven't been here before about, what's the grass makeup here?
It's Bermuda, various types of Bermuda, tee to green, and then we've got bent grass greens, SR 1020 bent grass greens.
Okay. And I know like, you alluded to you've got, is it the US Senior Men's Amateur
Yeah, so we've got
coming?
the senior women's amateur
Okay.
in 28, and then the senior men's amateur in 35.
Okay.
State am in 27.
So you're going to be busy. You're going to
We're
try
going
to
to be busy.
max
Yeah,
out this
yeah,
hodgepodge of different Bermudas and SR 1020, which I mean, as you know, in one of your previous stops, you and I worked very closely on some of the newer bents, and
right.
SR 1020 doesn't really fit the newer bent banner.
Yeah, yeah.
But certainly, downstream, thinking about the future here, I'm sure there's maybe developments in the offerings of grasses available and
Mhm.
whatnot that you could see that might excite you to put into play here.
Yeah, both Bermuda and bent, and we've got a nursery right outside the shop here, so we were able to seed that last fall, and we'll play around with that and see if there's anything there we like. And um, you know, you guys have got some tests right here in Middle Tennessee. Jeff Huber, longtime friend of mine's got some interesting things happening at his place with some test plots.
Yeah, so Dr. Bowling's really been the lead on that. We've they were kind enough. They have a reno coming, and um, we were able to put some of the newer bent grasses in, and they have a really large nursery space
Hmm.
there.
Yeah.
And it's twofold, right? Because it allows us as researchers to be able to get a read on, um, what these grasses look like in um, a setting that is not a research farm, right? Because like the management
Right.
intensity of the research farm just isn't the same. And we want to be able to gauge what it's going to do under your level
Hmm.
of maintenance intensity. So that's super helpful, right? And if you look at like, if one were to critique NTEP trials as a whole, it's largely that kind of same thing that like we can
Hmm.
try to make it a golf course, but I always go back to what my one of my advisors in grad school, Pete Lansku, drilled into me that like we're never going to be a golf course. Like we
Hmm.
might have the best of intentions, but we'll never be a golf course because our tee sheet is 0, 365 days a year.
Yeah,
Uh,
right.
but so that was super helpful. And then, just to get it in a different environment was helpful. And, one of our big drives, Dr. Bowling is going to lead. We've joked it that's going to be our big orange bentgrass test, our Bob Day,
Hmm.
where we'll have a event, hopefully in the spring of next year, where we'll only have, at that point, we'll have looked at how do these things grow in? How do they get through winter number one?
Hmm.
How do they get through this coming summer? How do they get through winter number two? So we get into the spring of 27. There's a lot to be learned and a lot to share,
Right,
right? To
right.
to do that. And I think having them side by side will be pretty
Mhm.
useful.
Yeah, and there's probably not a lot of us left, right, that have bent grass greens, at least in Middle Tennessee. But I think what we're seeing out of some of these newer bents that may change a little bit down the road. I'm not sure,
I'm a believer
but
that that's true. And, I mean, not to call anybody out, but I mean, I think if you were to drive the state right now from Johnson City to Memphis and look at kind of the effects of, as I've joked, the Siberian front that went through and,
hmm,
AFC Championship weekend,
yeah,
um, there's not a whole lot of winter injury on bent grass greens, but there's a fair amount of winter injury on Bermuda grass
yeah,
greens, right? And,
that's right.
that was one system. Now, a little abnormal.
Mhm.
We don't usually get ice and have covers under ice for an extended period, but I think it gets back to, as you and I talked about at one of your former stops, like you need to think about like the ceiling and the floor,
Right,
and what do those two things look like?
right.
And um, I think some of it is maybe fighting the dogma or maybe pre-formed strong opinions, tightly held of what
Hmm.
bentgrass can and cannot do, because
Hmm.
the newer varieties seem to maybe break the mold on some of that front. So
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see as
Yeah,
clubs go forward.
and we talk about bent grass, but we also have a Bermuda grass green here too that we're playing around with. And
Hmm.
at the end of the day, if that's a better surface, then that's what the membership deserves. So
Right, right. What cultivar?
it's Tiff Eagle.
Tiff Eagle. Yeah, it seems like that's definitely the cultivar du jour right now for the
Yeah,
the renos that are active,
yeah.
which is interesting how it's shifted over time,
Right,
right?
right.
But kind of switching gears a little, we've talked project and somewhat and grass selection. You talked about playing a lot of golf out here. Rounds played wise, if you had to estimate how many rounds this property gets in a year,
27 to 30.
that's pretty high for a
Pretty
private
high.
club.
Yeah, yeah.
And, I asked that question in that kind of a geek for the shoulder season traffic thing, right?
Right.
If anybody who's listening that's seen me speak to an audience, I share the National Golf Foundation data that like we've exceeded the Tiger boom in rounds played
Hmm.
for 5 years in a row, or 4 out of 5 years, right?
Yeah,
Which was like the high watermark for multiple decades. And that's not insignificant, right? When we think about putting that kind of traffic down, particularly during the shoulders.
right.
What are your traffic mitigation strategies here?
So fortunately, we have GPS on our carts, so that allows us to kind of shut some areas down. And the club, and I would, congratulate my predecessor, Doug, and the green committees in the past, but we go cart path only January through May 15-ish.
If you
Um,
need somebody to go up to the clubhouse and applaud, I'll do that for
yeah,
you.
right. So, that's not to say it's not a controversial
Yeah.
program, but this is year two in it. And, you and I'll take a look at the golf course later today, and I think you'll see the positive results of that. But so that helps. I think one of the things that has changed through the years is, we just didn't really fertilize that much at some of the stops I've had. It just wasn't necessary. And I think when you're pushing this many rounds through a golf course, you've really got to watch your fertility levels to make sure that you're growing fast enough to overcome some of that traffic.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've talked a little bit to different superintendent groups across the region about even shoulder season fertility,
Hmm.
going into the
Yeah.
fall when you're going to have
And that's
that.
something new, right? That's changed a lot. It seemed like we were always told not to fertilize with nitrogen
Right. And then
late
you
in the
dig
year.
and then if one digs into the literature, it's really hard to find any hard data to like support where that comes from. Right.
Hmm.
Um, because like I'll brag on Ben Worley at Texas A&M when he was a grad student at NC State. He did some really nice work that looked at Bermuda grass green up in the springtime. And that work largely finds that Bermuda grass green up in the springtime is a function of the nitrogen content that's in the stolon tissue in the spring. And they looked at the efficiency of getting nitrogen into the stolon. And as you can imagine, it's way lower in the spring when you're trying to get nitrogen into a plant that's dormant or semi-dormant waking up. And it's way higher in the fall, right?
Mhm.
Which kind of supports the idea that like a late summer, early fall feed can be really helpful in driving that green up in the spring, particularly if you're going to be under a traffic situation. And it's really head scratching to me. And I'm like, you can speak to this. You've grown plenty of high level turf north of the Mason-Dixon line. As a kid who grew up in Massachusetts, fall fertility for spring greenups pretty common.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you come down to this
Dormant
region,
feeding too.
yeah, you come down
Yeah.
to this region, and most clubs that I know will do some sort of bulk spread between May 1st and the 4th of July in that
Mhm.
window, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, and we used to do a lot of potassium too, right? And then
Right.
the price of potassium went up and there wasn't as much of that that went out. But, I would also say, what is late summer or fall now, right? Because
Excellent.
you're
Excellent question.
probably, is that November? Is it October? It's like, Mark Stovall and I joke about this all the time. That summer lasts a month longer and spring is delayed a month.
Yeah, his thing is like
It's like a
rip the
calendar
calendar off and
shift of a month.
go to the month prior, and
Yeah,
then that's the
yeah,
actual month
yeah.
you're in. Yeah, no, it's
And he
true.
would know because he is so good at, keeping that weather data
Yeah,
through the years.
no, for sure. I think it's really important. And the other thing I think that I've seen that's really cool is knowing that this topic is so important about traffic on the golf course and the shoulders, because it not only affects what I do with POA and other weeds, but it just affects turf quality and green up and how you come out of the box in the springtime. It's one of those things that's really hard because we know it's really important and it's really hard to quantify,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Like
right.
it doesn't really set up real well for like a randomized complete block design four rep
Hmm.
research trial
Yeah,
for what we do for evaluating a herbicide or what Dr. Horvath does for evaluating a fungicide. It just doesn't set up for that. And one of the things I recently saw I thought was really cool, and I could see on my peripheral vision, you've got a drone here on the other side of the conference room.
hmm,
I was working with a private club in this region, and they know now they're all zoysia, they're not Bermuda grass, but they know that this traffic is a significant issue for them. And when they started to get maybe some pushback about um, reducing car traffic from the golf operation, they would do drone flights from above the property. And they were kind enough to share some of these pictures with me. And just wild that you'll never see the damage from 6 feet.
yeah.
But when you get that drone way up in the air, you can certainly see every tire track of every cart. And what's interesting too is like you could not only see the tire tracks from the carts, particularly at the pinch points, you can see it from the mowing equipment in
Hmm.
areas where carts don't go, right?
Right,
Which
right.
kind of calls into question like sometimes it's, well, let's go run the mowers to mow out the cart tracks,
Yeah,
right? And
right. Yeah,
that
yeah,
might be counterproductive in the long run to do that. So once you kind of get settled in here, I think some flights in the fall might be really eye-opening.
yeah,
I'm going
yeah.
to myself and Dr. Bowling and Dr. Horvath, we're actually speaking to a group of golf course owners. There's a National Golf Course Owners Association meeting coming up in Franklin in 2 weeks. And I'm actually going to share those photos at that meeting as a, hey, when your agronomy teams are talking about like
Yeah.
reducing cart traffic, this is why, right? Like we
Mhm.
can see it.
Yep.
And it's not just seeing it now, because like you know, I think it's easy in the spring to blame delayed green up on things that are not related to car traffic.
Hmm.
One of the things that our group has done this year, and it's not really a research trial because it's not replicated, but I lean into what my PhD advisor told me that first step in the scientific method is observation, right?
Hmm.
We took they're called pneumatic road tubes. So they're the things that like you'll see on side roads that'll gauge your speed. There's
Oh
black
yeah,
tubing.
sure. Yeah.
Put those on one of our golf courses close to campus, and put a set on the cart path to identify here's how many carts are on that hole every day. And then this is a long par four. So we put a set right at the beginning of the fairway cut that like everybody would drive the ball over this. So there's no way that you would really drive through this area. So that was our low traffic. And then we set a set of tubing out kind of close to the green, just outside the edge of the landing zone, kind of where you would hit your shot, drive to the green, and then exit to
Hmm.
go up to the green complex proper. And there's pronounced delays in spring green up as to be expected. But what I'm excited to sit down and do here in a week or so is like get the cart path passes associated with those delays to have
Right.
it be like real numbers because as you know, post COVID, well, a round might not be one cart, right? Like round could be two carts, and some
Mhm.
places a round is four carts,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yeah,
You know,
we're
I was
trying
at a
to put a
property
stop to
recently
that.
where a
Yeah.
round was five
Yeah.
carts. It was for four players and a caddy was in
Yeah.
the fifth cart.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a crazy, crazy issue.
Well, you guys had done some work at the farm, right? Where you were
Yeah.
driving carts, and I think the take-home message might have even been a quote was, "Well, you don't need a research paper to."
Yeah, no, no stats needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, there
I
was
mean,
no
it was,
stats needed to
yeah,
know what the effect of the traffic
yeah,
was
yeah,
on that
and
one.
maintenance traffic too. We're certainly guilty as well. Where guys are parking when they're pulling up to rake a bunker or mow a green. We have to manage that traffic as well. We forget
Yeah.
about that a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, and I've been to places where that's an issue. And then, if it's a big operation, it's fortunate enough that everybody has a cart. Well, then people don't ride together, even if they're going out to the same hole to do the same job. Let's 2x the traffic.
Yeah,
Uh,
and caddies and
yep.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a significant issue. So we've talked about some of the detriments. Let's talk maybe about some to turf quality. Let's talk about some things that might make turf quality a little better, right? I arrived this morning and learned that there's robot mowers being installed
that's
here.
right. That's right.
Can you share a little bit about that process? Like what
Yeah,
led you to robots? What are you hoping to gain? Like what's the big picture on the robot front?
yeah. So, I've never been like an early adapter of the technology. I
Same.
tend to kind of sit back and hear what guys have to say about it, and then find a friend that's doing it and get feedback from them. But at a property like this where we're doing so many rounds of golf, the membership experience is a pretty significant disruption when we're out there mowing rough, and we have quite a lot of rough to mow. There's a lot of Bermuda grass rough here between holes and near tees, and so it takes a long time to mow the rough. And so if we can get a better quality cut, if we can reduce some of that compaction with these heavy rough mowers, and if we can reduce member disruption, then I think it's a win for everybody. So, we went all in on autonomous rough mowers this year. The team from Husqvarna is out right now, getting them set on the golf course and programmed. And, here within the next week or so, we'll be off and running with those. We'll probably start mowing Thursday or Friday in some areas. And then, of course, it's just going to be a continuous monitoring process to make sure they're all dialed in and going where they're supposed to go. But I'm excited about that.
So
Very
I'm
excited.
I'm totally ignorant. What's involved from going, we don't have autonomous mowers to we want to have this
Yeah.
fleet of autonomous mowers
Hmm.
mowing our roughs and like it's set it and forget it. Like what are the things that like maybe you knew you were gonna have the boxes you're gonna have to check, and as you got a little deeper, it was, oh wow, I didn't even think about that, but we better make sure that that's right.
Yeah. So we were fortunate here in that we have power on every hole
Oh
because we've got
wow.
fans.
Wow.
So we were able to get an electrician and figure out exactly where we would tap in and reduce and all these type things. And so we were able to get set up from a power perspective pretty easily. If we didn't have that, it would probably be next year before we were ready for that.
Okay.
Um, so we did that. The property is fairly easy to get communication across, according to the Husqvarna team that analyzed that. So, the signal's good. And we've got some pretty good places to sort of hide them.
Okay.
One of the complications of this property is we flood badly at times. So it's about getting them staged or housed outside of the floodplain so that we don't come in one morning and half of our fleet's washed down the river. Uh, uh, so there's a little bit more travel time for some of our mowers. And they're kind of tucked in around some of the perimeters. So we were able to hide them pretty well, and we'll
Okay.
work on that as the summer goes on with some tall grasses and things like that. But um, as far as availability goes, that's a positive. It's a very challenging time to get equipment, I think, from all colors.
Right.
So at least the guys at Husqvarna have a good inventory, and we're able to get us the mowers pretty quickly. So we got go ahead. I believe it was in January, and we're effectively mowing this week with them. So,
Wow.
and we probably could have done it a little bit sooner if it hadn't been for the ice storm that we had.
Yeah. Yeah. You've had
Yeah,
some
we're still cleaning up from
you
the ice
had some
storm.
significant
Yeah,
issues, as did many.
yeah.
So roughly, no pun intended, how many acres of rough are you hoping to mow with these?
Probably about 60 or 70.
And then how many units to tackle
There's 20,
60 acre job?
27 units,
Wow.
all different sizes.
Okay.
Some of them are smaller, four-wheel drive, and then we have the very large ones as well.
And then like how did you make your distinction of like
I didn't. Yeah, I had experts
yeah,
help me with
fair
that.
enough.
Yeah,
No, I
I
mean
mean,
and
you want to look at the efficiency of it, but you got to look at the slope and the size of
right,
an area and how this property's got a road that bisects it. We've got a creek. We've got several holes that flood. There's some logistics issues that we had to navigate through, and that's what we thought would give us the most flexibility.
right. Right. Yeah, I mean, and then the other thing I've heard from the clubs I've been to that have these is you can run into issues where like they might fall in a bunker.
Right,
Right.
right.
And then, obviously someone's going to go out and tend to that. Will you have to add staff like a manager for this fleet, or is it something that your current equipment management team can take on?
We feel like the team we have in place can handle that.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Because I mean
Now, it
they
doesn't
do,
mean we won't grow into that at some
right.
point, but we feel like certainly to get started this year, we're capable of doing what they've asked us to do.
So have you thought forward with, maybe it's too soon, right? Because they're still out there like actually getting these things set up and going with the removal of 60 acres of rough mowing, like how will you redistribute that labor to other parts of the golf course? Because to me, like that
Right.
is like the real ROI of,
Right.
well, if we're going to take labor away from this, now I can apply this to detail work and stuff that's
Mhm.
really golfer facing. Like if you thought about like in a perfect world, where would you deploy that labor?
Well, that's exactly where we intend to put it. Fill in divots, edging cart paths, picking up broken tees,
Right.
all that type of stuff. We want to be able to do in the afternoon hours, quietly.
Hmm.
And we think it's really gonna help us.
Yeah, it's cool. And I mean, I'm not sure, but about a major install. You might be one of the first in Tennessee to go all in. I don't know for
Maybe.
sure though.
Yeah. You know, we also had a fleet of rough mowers that was at the end of its life expectancy. So,
Okay.
we needed to pull the trigger on something for the rough. So, we felt like everything was coming together, and we went ahead and did it.
Yeah, that's exciting. That'll
Yeah.
be cool to um, come back and see when they're really rocking and rolling,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it might be one of those like a thing that you could add to the list. One of my questions here for you is as a guy who's worked at so many places, you take things away from a place like, what are some of the most important lessons maybe you've learned, whether it was Oakmont or South Florida or Forest Hills or Fox Chapel, excuse me, wh- like what are some of the key lessons that you took to from job number one to move to job number two? Because that probably everything builds, right?
It does. Um, Communication is really important, and you got to get in front of things, right? It's not always going to go your way. It's not always going to be sunny and
Right.
75. and things are going to happen. And, the more in front of those you are communicating, letting Green Committee and GM and people like that know what's going on, that'll help you.
I
I
mean,
find that people are pretty supportive when you talk to them about challenges you're having. And, there's certainly been some lessons I've learned along the way that have helped me get better at that.
well, I mean, and you've been involved in some big club undertakings, let's call it,
Yeah,
right? And
that's
like,
right.
I'm sure that effective communication was a really, really big tool in your toolbox to make those things move forward and be as successful as they can. And with here, one of the things in the long-term arc of Belle Meade is maybe to recapture some of the Ross architecture and Ross legacy. As a Ross Society member, I'm obligated to
There you
ask
go.
to ask you about
Yep.
the
Yep.
Ross history of the
Yep.
property. Um, as you think about the vision, and I know you guys have um, began a relationship with Andy Staples to kind of talk about very slowly in a very thoughtful and intentional way, what a big project here might look
Mhm.
like. Like, can you speak a little bit about how like you're approaching communicating that to the members here?
Sure. So, Cherokee Country Club, as you know, just right down the street
Hmm.
from the university, is a Donald Ross golf course. And so I fell in love with Donald Ross um, right out of high school. We got to work with Ron Pritchard to restore the bunkers at Cherokee. So that was a great experience. So I love Donald Ross. Um, but Donald Ross sort of renovated or made improvements to an original H. Barker design. So that's one of the things that Andy Staples is looking into is, what was Barker, what was Ross, what should we try and sort of replicate or pay homage to along the way. Fortunately for us, there's a lot of images. We've
Okay.
got a lot of historical images of the golf course. There was a lot of like exhibition matches and things like that played through the years. So we've got some really interesting photographs. So there's plenty for a guy like Andy Staples to draw on.
Yeah.
Um, Certainly, we have to, anytime you would do something like that, the golf course has to get better
Right.
and it has to get more playable in the sense of, you know, does it drain better after a rain? Is there more tee space for the increased rounds that we're having? Are there more pin locations? So those are all the things that Andy Staples and the committee are working on.
Well, and I mean, then you know, there's a disruption to play. And when the rubber meets the road, the members
Right,
are going to lose their golf course for a little while. And
right,
communicating the why, I think would be, I say this as a member of another club, like that would be really important,
right.
right?
And there's a history of large projects on this golf course through the years. There's been a number of them. So um, it helps when there's some history of that.
Yeah,
Some clubs, be maybe relatively untouched for the last 50 or 60 years, and there's not a lot of members there that have ever been through anything like that. So,
right.
uh, at least here, a large portion of the membership would know, they would have a sense as to what's coming.
Well, and it might be too soon to tell, right? But do you have a sense that the membership would be excited to recapture some of that Ross footprint?
I think so, but that's down the road, and we'll see what Andy Staples draws, and you know, I've got full faith in him. He's putting a lot of time and effort into it. The committee's really engaged, and he's got a lot to draw on. So I think it's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Well, and you
You
know,
know, at the end of the day, you have to plan these things because certain features of the golf course have a life expectancy, right? And so if we're going to maintain the standard that they want, then there's got to be some type of bunker renovation. There's got to be some type of green
right.
renovation, tee renovation. So um, while yes, we're talking about a renovation down the road, it's just sort of the natural process that a club has to go through.
Yeah, no, and I think we're seeing that now because we have, and I see this in my travels. I know Dr. Bowling sees it in her travels. You have clubs that understand that and are fortunate enough to have the resources to take action to, um, you know, deal with that and be intentional and do that in the right way. And then you have other courses that they either don't understand or they understand and they don't have the resources.
Mhm.
And now you're just kind of seeing the cumulative wear and tear of record golf for 6 years in a row now.
Right.
Um, which adds up,
That's right.
right? And it's really hard
That's
when you
right.
get into. I can think of a situation with a property in the west side of the state that really unfortunate incident happened there with their putting surfaces. And the best thing for them would be, based on the age and the infrastructure, to you know capture the moment and build it back the right way. Like it's more than time,
Right.
but there's just not the resources and the appetite to do that. And it's really hard, right? Because the expectation level is super high. Because I mean, heck, it's Masters Week and it's 70 degrees outside, and everybody wants to go play golf and have it be great.
Right.
Um, but sometimes on tired infrastructure coming through a harsh winter or a harsh summer, I mean, it's just tricky.
Yeah, and as busy as everybody's golf course is now, we really have to be careful that we don't shorten the life expectancy of some of these features, because it is so difficult to get out there and aerify or verticut or, install a little drainage
Right.
or to work on the irrigation system. You got 30,000 rounds a year going through your golf course. There's not a lot of time to see the heads run.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's too late, right?
Yeah.
So it makes everything that we do that much more challenging.
That is, man, that's a big number. That really surprised me. I'm not going to go back and geek out on traffic anymore, but gosh, that's a big number
Yeah,
for here. That's way more than
yeah.
I thought you would say.
And we have our fair share of walking golf as well, but it's still a lot of foot traffic on a green.
Yeah, because pretty robust caddy program, as I recall.
Pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I haven't been through a summer, but yeah, yeah, we do a lot of caddy rounds.
yeah, which is cool. You don't see that as much
Yeah,
anymore as when you and I were kids.
but you don't see as many divots filled with those walking and caddy round,
Fair.
right?
That's
So,
fair. That's
so
fair.
there's a negative to that as well.
So what I'm going to do here, Pat, is I'm going to put up for our superintendent friends our GCSA code as a reminder. This code that you see right here, this is for Golf Course Superintendents Association education points. I'm going to say this really clearly. This has nothing to do with pesticide. This has nothing to do with pesticide credits. You do not need anything on the screen to get a pesticide credit. This is only for golf course superintendent's education. While we let that sit, because we know we're coming, up on the end of our time, I told you before we clicked start that I was going to ask you a thought-provoking question. So it's time for the thought-provoking question. Um, last year, as I interviewed people on these shows, I had them give me their Mount Rushmore of a particular thing. Like, um, I forget who the guest was. It might have been Jesse Benelli with Enview. And I asked him, like, what's your Mount Rushmore of turf diseases, right? And you want to hear an argument. You can get pathologists arguing about the Mount Rushmore of diseases. That's a just sit back and listen type thing. But I was thinking, like, what's the kind of thought-provoking question for this year going to be? And what I kind of landed on is something that I've been known to ask students, but I'm going to reframe it, right? Because you're not a student, you're a colleague. So my question is, you look at our industry is very different today in 2026 than it was when you or I got started in it many years ago.
Very different.
So if you go and, like, let's say 1980, right, as your start
I
point.
wasn't alive in 1980, just for the record.
Okay. Well, I was. Um, let's say 1980 is your start point. We're 2026. That's, 46 years. Over that arc of time, what do you think's been the biggest change in turf management on a golf course? There's no wrong answers.
Yeah. Certainly the expectation
For
has to
sure.
has to be at the top, right?
Yep.
I've joked a little bit that, and it's really not funny. Bent grass greens used to get thin. They'd get thin in July and August, and they'd bounce back in September, October, and we called it summer stress. It's just summertime.
Right.
Um, I think pathology's gotten better. They've been able to identify some diseases that were probably picking away at that. Um, and I think there's an expectation that we can fight through that now. And it's tough. right?
The standard has
The
changed.
standard has changed, and I think that's why you see a lot of Bermuda, right? If we can overcome that in those July, August months,
Hmm.
um, and it's certainly valid, right? It should be considered. Think about when you want your golf course at its best and when you can tolerate it at its worst. Um,
And that certainly gets into, I mean, you and I have talked for
yeah,
hours
we
about
have,
that
yeah,
when it comes to grass
yeah,
selection. And um, but if you could think about a piece of, I mean, not so much technology and like software per se, because
hmm,
you know, the modern mower, like a flex head mower, that's a change
right,
in terms of technology. You know, what are maybe what from that front in
yeah.
terms of like things that have had the biggest impact on the
Hmm.
industry? Like, what are the things that jump off the page for you?
Probably the moisture meter.
Okay.
You know, the TDRs were a game changer, and again, I was not an early adapter of that. I remember the day Jason Sanderson brought it over to the golf course. You know Jason
Yep.
well, and I'm like, I don't want anything to do with this, and but he convinced me it was the right thing to do, and you know, we put away the Barlows that we had learned
Yep.
from David Stone, and you know, now with the USGA moisture meter, you can pull up on your phone and see what guys are getting across the golf course. You could
That's
share
cool.
that with their teammates, and um, you know, you can check moisture on a green that's got dew on it. That's something we didn't used to be able to do.
Wow.
We didn't used to be able to put sunscreen on because our fingers would be oily and
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
we wouldn't be able to feel the moisture on the Barlow knife. So moisture meters to me, they've probably been the most important piece of technology outside of mowers and things that equipment manager would use to,
I mean, and it's like ubiquitous now. It's on
yeah,
like every, someone in your chair or a superintendent's chair, beneath a director, like it's on the cart. Like it's
right.
just part of
Yeah.
the package.
And that's just the start of it, right? I mean, what we're able to do it now, charting clipping yields and seeing soil temps versus, you know, top
Right.
growth and I'm just scratching the surface on that. You know, we're implementing those processes now through USGA Deacon, but you know, it's going to take another month or two probably before we're able to really modify practices from that data.
Well, and it's interesting, and like, and we can save this for another time to go like down to the bottom of the rabbit hole. But I can think of a conversation I had with a colleague of yours about they came back from the national and they went to a presentation. Um, I can't remember what the title was, but it talked about all these tech changes that are modern, right? With clipping volume and OM246 and all the cool things that we can measure, right?
Hmm.
And he asked me a fascinating question. He's like, I'm trying to decide, like, I know that all these things are good. None of them are inherently bad. I'm trying to decide, like, how much ROI I'm going to get
Right.
on my product if I go all in on all of them, if I go all in on one of them. Like
Yeah.
if my greens are already at a 95
Hmm.
and if I go all in on um, clipping volume or clipping volume as a function of growth potential or what have you, am I going to go from a 95 to a 98? And is the
Hmm.
effort spent in doing
Yeah.
that and tracking all that data enough to return the ROI to go from 95 to
Right.
98? And it's a really interesting question, and I don't know what the right answer is
Hmm.
because, like, yeah, I mean, it's easy to say, like, well, yeah, of course you want to get better. You want to go to 98, but maybe the
Is the membership
resources
going to
aren't,
pay for that?
is that
Right.
maybe the resources aren't there to
Yeah,
really do that.
that's right.
Um, not only just from financial resources, but time, right? I mean,
Right.
there's a lot to get done every single day in your role that if you have to allocate time or one of the people on your crew's time to doing that, the ROI needs to be worth it.
Right. One of the ways we look at it here is the member experience. Does it make the member experience better?
Right.
And that could be from someone who's a championship golfer, someone that's a beginning golfer, someone that's just out, you know, playing socially with their friends. Does it make their experience better? Is
Yeah.
there less disruption, whatever the case may be? And so that's, I think, an important piece
Right.
of it is that member experience. Yes, return on investment from a dollar's perspective is important, and it always will be, regardless of what club you're at. But um, you got to pay close attention to the member experience as
Right.
well.
Yeah,
Right. There's a lot of things we can do to greens to make them better that ruin the experience for the membership in the meantime.
that's true.
Right.
Yeah,
And
that's
sometimes
true.
we can make them too good and it ruins the member experience because, they simply can't putt on them when they're that fast.
And rounds become 5.5 hours long.
Right. Right. So you got to find the sweet spot.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Pat, I know we're getting to the end here. I'm gonna take our GCSA code off the screen. I want to thank you for being the guinea pig. I don't know that all these microphones worked, but I hope that they did.
We'll find out
Uh,
if you've got 100 emails when
Yeah,
it's
I
over.
did hear that one thing I think I've learned from this is that I need to make sure that I put my phone on do not disturb because the text bang brigade was hard to not notice. Um, so
You're a
uh,
popular
so
person.
David, I'll tell you, and our guest for May is David Stone. I will have my phone on do not disturb when I'm with David doing an interview with him in person. But no, seriously, I appreciate the time and your willingness to have us here on site with you at Belle Meade and look forward to seeing the golf course.
Well, it's a pretty special day for me to be at Belle Meade and have you here. And I look forward to getting out on the golf course with you later.
All right, well, let's go do it. Well, thank you everyone for listening. We'll leave it there for our April Turf Tuesday, and we will see everybody back in May. Our guest, as I alluded to earlier, I'll be with David Stone down at the Honors. We'll talk about his kind of legendary career in turf and all the people that he's had an influence on in our business. So until then, enjoy the rest of your day.